Hello, friends. I'm Laura Bennett, a 36-year-old mom living in the serene suburb of Naperville, Illinois, where snow-dusted streets and cozy homes paint a picture of warmth and community. My world centers on my extraordinary son, Caleb, who's 8, and my steadfast husband, Mark. We're an ordinary family with a story that's anything beautiful, sparked by a single piece of mail that tore through my heart like a winter storm, setting us on a path of truth, courage, and unwavering love. If you're listening from somewhere across America, drop your city in the comments below. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this journey will unravel everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and the fierce love of a mother. It was a crisp December afternoon last year, the kind where the air smells of pine and promise. I stood at our kitchen counter, sorting through a pile of holiday cards, their cheerful reds and greens a stark contrast to the gray weight I'd been carrying. Among them was an envelope from my parents, James and Patricia Coleman, their elegant, gold-embossed stationery a hallmark of their meticulous traditions. The invitation to their annual Christmas dinner at their Naperville home was a ritual I'd known since childhood. A gathering filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the glow of a perfectly decorated tree. But as I slid the card from its envelope, my breath caught, and the world seemed to tilt. The words, typed in cold, deliberate black and gold, stared back at me. Annual Coleman Family Christmas, the 25th of December, 3 p.m. Adults, Sophie and Liam only, please. Sophie and Liam, my sister Sarah's twins, were the cherished grandchildren, the ones my parents placed on a pedestal. But Caleb, me, sensitive, star-obsessed boy, whose eyes light up at the mention of constellations, was explicitly excluded. I read the line again, my hands trembling, hoping I'd misread that this was some clerical error. But there it was, undeniable. My son, my heart, was not welcome at the family Christmas, while his cousins were invited to bask in the holiday's magic. The pain was visceral, a sharp ache that spread from my chest to my fingertips, mingling with a rising tide of anger and betrayal. How could my own parents, the ones who raised me, deem my child unworthy of their table? To understand the weight of that moment, you need to know our story. Growing up in Naperville's tree-lined embrace, I was the quieter daughter, the one who found solace in books and science fairs, while my sister Sarah, 2 years younger, dazzled with her effortless charm. Our parents, James, a precise accountant with a voice that commanded attention, and Patricia, whose bakery was the heart of our town, saw Sarah as their shining star. Her dance recitals were family pilgrimages, her crayon drawings framed on the living room wall. My achievements, like winning the state science fair or earning a scholarship to the University of Michigan, were met with polite nods, tucked away like afterthoughts. I remember painting a picture for my mother at 10, pouring my heart into every brushstroke, only to find it stuffed in a closet while Sarah's artwork took pride of place. That subtle but persistent message that I was somehow less followed me into adulthood. When I met Mark, a software engineer with a warm smile and a working-class upbringing from Toledo, Ohio, my parents' tepid handshakes spoke volumes. They saw his modest Ruchi's father a mechanic, his mother a librariana's beneath their expectations. By contrast, Sarah's boyfriend, Ryan, a wealthy entrepreneur from a family of real estate moguls, was welcomed with open arms, their enthusiasm spilling over at every family dinner. Our wedding, a simple affair funded largely by Mark's parents, Ellen and Tom, was a footnote compared to Sarah's extravagant engagement party, complete with a string quartet and a $15,000 venue. And when Caleb was born, after a grueling 40-hour labor that ended in an emergency C-section, my parents measured congratulations a card, and a practical gift paled next to the elaborate nursery they built for Sarah's twins, Sophie and Liam, just months later. Caleb is my miracle, a boy with dark curls and eyes that hold galaxies. He can name every planet in our solar system and spends hours sketching constellations, his voice bubbling with excitement as he explains supernovas. But he's also sensitive. Loud noises send him into a panic, and certain textures, like scratchy sweaters, trigger distress. At 5, he was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder and traits of high-functioning autism, a revelation that brought clarity and purpose to Mark and me. We learned to create a quiet corner at home, filled with soft blankets and noise-canceling headphones, and enrolled in workshops to understand his unique needs. To us, Caleb's differences were part of his brilliance, threads in the vibrant tapestry of who he is. But to my parents, he was difficult, a puzzle they had no interest in solving, unlike Sophie and Liam, who glided through milestones with the ease of storybook children. The Christmas invitation wasn't the first wound. Last summer, I organized a stargazing night in our backyard, hoping Caleb could share his passion for astronomy with the family. I spent weeks planning, setting up telescopes and printing star charts, imagining my parents' pride, as Caleb pointed out Orion's belt. But they declined, citing a soccer game for Sophie and Liam, their voices casual, as if Caleb's moment didn't matter. At their 35th anniversary celebration, Sophie and Liam wore custom Grandkids of Honor shirts, their laughter echoing through the venue, while Caleb was handed a coloring book and told to sit quietly in a corner. Each exclusion was a pebble in a growing pile, eroding my hope that my parents could see Caleb's light. But I held on, conditioned by years of family loyalty, believing love could bridge the gap. That invitation, though, was a sledgehammer. As I showed it to Mark, his jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with protective fury. "This isn't right, Laura," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Caleb deserves better than this." I nodded, tears spilling over, my heart breaking for the boy upstairs, blissfully unaware that his grandparents had cast him aside. Caleb was sketching planets, his small hands moving with purpose, oblivious to the fact that he'd been deemed unfit for their holiday glow. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A mother's love, fierce and unyielding, rose above the pain. I knew I had to act, not just for myself, but for Caleb, whose worth was non-negotiable. This story isn't about a single holiday slight. It's about uncovering a pattern of favoritism woven through years of family ties, about standing tall for those you love, and about redefining what family truly means. It's a journey through betrayal, revelation, and the kind of courage that comes from protecting a child's heart. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between keeping the peace and fighting for someone you love? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. This is just the beginning, friends. What I discovered in the months that followed would unravel secrets, challenge loyalties, and teach me the power of love that refuses to bend. Stick with me, because this is a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family. Hello, friends. Laura Bennett here, sharing the next chapter of our journey from Naperville, Illinois, where the quiet streets and golden summers of my childhood hold memories both tender and sharp. If you're joining me from somewhere across America, drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know where you are. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about digging deep into the roots of family dynamics, uncovering the pain of being overlooked, and finding the strength to rise above it. Last time, I shared how a single Christmas invitation excluding my son Caleb while welcoming his cousins shattered my heart. But to understand why that moment cut so deeply, we need to travel back to the years when I learned what it meant to live in my sister Sarah's shadow. A shadow that stretched across my life and, eventually, my son's. Growing up in Naperville, with its charming downtown and tree-lined neighborhoods, was like living in a postcard. Our home was filled with the aroma of my mother Patricia's baking, her bakery, a local treasure, and the steady presence of my father James, an accountant whose precision shaped our family's rhythm. But beneath the surface of our idyllic life, there was a quiet divide. I was the older daughter, introspective and driven, finding joy in science projects and library stacks. Sarah, 2 years younger, was a burst of lither, laughter-filled rooms. Her grace on the dance floor captivated everyone. To my parents, she was the sun and I was the moon, always reflecting her glow rather than shining on my own. The favoritism was subtle at first, woven into the fabric of our daily lives. When I was 8, I spent weeks on a science fair project, a model volcano that erupted with perfect precision. I won first place, my heart swelling with pride as I clutched my ribbon. But at dinner that night, the conversation swirled around Sarah's upcoming dance recital, her tutu already hanging in the living room like a trophy. My ribbon was tucked into a drawer, my victory a footnote. Sarah's crayon drawings bold and color-fueled prime spots on the fridge, while mine, carefully detailed, were slipped into a kitchen cabinet. I remember standing in front of the refrigerator at 10, staring at her artwork, wondering what made mine less worthy. By high school, the pattern was unmistakable. I threw myself into academics, earning straight A's and captaining the debate team. My scholarship to the University of Michigan was a dream come true. a testament to years of hard work. But at family gatherings, my achievements were met with polite nods, overshadowed by Sarah's triumphs. When she was crowned homecoming queen, my parents threw a lavish party, their pride spilling over in toasts and photo albums. I stood on the sidelines, smiling through the sting, telling myself it didn't matter. But it did. Each moment reinforced a quiet truth. In my parents' eyes, I was second best. One memory stands out, raw and vivid. At 14, I organized a family camping trip to Starved Rock State Park, dreaming of roasting marshmallows and sharing stories under the stars. I spent weeks planning, mapping trails, and packing supplies, hoping to create a memory we'd all cherish. But the day before, my parents canceled, saying Sarah's piano recital had been rescheduled. "It's a big opportunity for her," my mother said, her voice gentle but firm. I unpacked the camping gear alone, tears blurring my vision, the weight of being overlooked settling into my bones. That moment wasn't just about a missed trip, it was a lesson in where I stood in the family hierarchy. As we grew older, the divide followed us. When I met Mark at Michigan, his kindness and grounded spirit felt like home. Raised in Toledo, Ohio, by a mechanic father and a librarian mother, he was everything I needed: steady, thoughtful, and unafraid to challenge the world's expectations. But when I brought him to Naperville, my parents' reception was chilly. James's handshake was curt. Patricia's smile strained. Their questions about his prospects laced with judgment. I saw the contrast 2 years later when Sarah introduced Ryan, a polished entrepreneur from a wealthy Chicago family. My parents embraced him like a son, their laughter echoing through the house, while Mark and I sat quietly, our hands clasped under the table. Our engagement brought the disparity into sharper focus. Mark proposed under a canopy of stars, his words simple and heartfelt. I said yes, my heart soaring, but when I shared the news, my mother's first question was whether we'd considered waiting until my career was more established. The subtext was clear. Mark, with his modest background, wasn't the match they'd envisioned. Our wedding, a warm, intimate affair in a Naperville garden, was funded mostly by Mark's parents, Ellen and Tom, who welcomed me with open hearts. My parents attended, their smiles polite, their gift practical a set of cookware that felt more like an obligation than a celebration. Sarah's engagement to Ryan, 6 months later, was a spectacle. My parents hosted a $15,000 party at a Chicago country club, complete with a live band and custom invitations. I stood in my simple dress, watching them beam as Sarah twirled with Ryan, and felt the familiar ache of being less. It wasn't about the money, it was about the message. Sarah's milestones were events, mine were afterthoughts. I buried the hurt, focusing on building a life with Mark, but those early wounds shaped how I saw myself, how I navigated my parents' world, and, later, how I fought for Caleb. When Caleb was born, the pattern extended to the next generation. His arrival, after a 40-hour labor and an emergency C-section, was a miracle that redefined my purpose. His dark curls and curious eyes stole my heart, but my parents' response was muted card, a practical gift, a quick visit. 4 months later, when Sarah announced her twins, Sophie and Liam, my mother transformed their guest room into a nursery, her excitement palpable. I watched, smiling through the ache, as they poured their love into Sarah's children, while Caleb's milestones, his first smile, his first word, were met with distracted nods. Those early years planted seeds of doubt, but they also forged my resilience. I channeled my energy into my career as a behavioral therapist, helping children like Caleb navigate their worlds. Mark and I built a home in Naperville, a cozy haven where Caleb's sketches of planets adorned the walls. But the shadow of my childhood lingered, a quiet fear that Caleb, too, would feel less in my parents' eyes. I pushed that fear down, clinging to the hope that love could change them, that they'd see Caleb's brilliant Shay's ability to recite the moons of Jupiter, his infectious joy when spotting a comet. The Christmas invitation, excluding Caleb while inviting Sophie and Liam, wasn't just a rejection of my sonnet, was the culmination of decades of favoritism, a mirror reflecting every moment I'd been pushed aside. As I stood in my kitchen, the card trembling in my hands, I felt the weight of those years every overlooked achievement, every canceled plan, every polite dismissal. But this time, it wasn't about me. It was about Caleb, my boy who deserved to be celebrated, not sidelined. Mark's voice, steady and fierce, broke through my tears. We're not letting this stand, Laura. Caleb is enough. This chapter of our story is about more than childhood slights. It's about the slow, aching realization that love can be conditional, even from those closest to you. It's about carrying the scars of being second best and finding the courage to demand better for your child. Have you ever felt overshadowed in your own family, your light dimmed by someone else's glow? Share your story below. I'd love to connect. This journey is just beginning, friends. What I learned next would uncover truths that shook our family to its core, but also lit the path to a love that refuses to fade. Hello, friends. Laura Bennett here, back in Naperville, Illinois, where the stars above our quiet suburb seem to shine a little brighter when seen through my son Caleb's eyes. If you're joining me from somewhere across this beautiful country, drop your city in the comments. I'd love to connect with you. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this chapter of our story is about celebrating the extraordinary light of a child who sees the world differently and the fierce love that fights to protect it. In my last chapters, I shared how a Christmas invitation excluding Caleb while inviting his cousins broke my heart, and how growing up in my sister Sarah's shadow shaped my understanding of family. Today, I want to introduce you to Caleb, the heart of this journey, whose unique brilliance taught me what it means to love without limits, even when those closest to you refuse to see the same spark. Caleb is my miracle, an 8-year-old boy with dark curls that tumble over his forehead and eyes that hold the depth of the cosmos. From the moment he was born, after a grueling 40-hour labor that ended in an emergency C-section, he captured my soul. His first cry was a song, his first smile, a sunrise. As he grew, I noticed the way he moved through the world, deliberate, curious, with a passion that burned brightest when he talked about stars. By 3, he could name every planet in our solar system, his tiny voice bubbling with excitement as he pointed to Jupiter's moons in his picture books. He'd spend hours sketching constellations, his small hands tracing Orion's belt with the precision of an artist. To me and my husband, Mark, Caleb was a galaxy of wonder. Each facet of his personality, a star in a constellation all his own. But Caleb's world wasn't always easy to navigate. Loud noises, like the clatter of dishes or the hum of a crowded room, could send him into a panic, his hands covering his ears as tears welled up. Certain texture-scratchy sweaters, gritty sand-triggered distress so intense he'd freeze, unable to move forward. At first, I thought it was just a phase, a quirk of toddlerhood. But by 4, when he'd sob inconsolably at birthday parties or refuse foods that felt wrong, I knew we needed answers. Just after his 5th birthday, a developmental specialist gave us clarity. Caleb had sensory processing disorder with traits of high-functioning autism. The diagnosis wasn't a wait, it was a map, guiding us to understand his needs and celebrate his strengths. Mark and I dove in, learning about sensory-friendly environments, enrolling in workshops, and creating a quiet corner in our Naperville homey nook with soft blankets, dim lights, and noise-canceling headphones where Caleb could find calm. To us, Caleb's differences were part of his brilliance. His ability to memorize the distances between stars, his infectious joy when spotting a comet through our backyard telescope, these were gifts. His sensitivity, though challenging, made him empathetic beyond his years. Once, at 6, he noticed a classmate struggling with a loud school assembly and quietly offered his own fidget toy, a small act of kindness that brought tears to my eyes. But not everyone saw Caleb the way we did. My parents, James and Patricia Coleman, viewed his differences as flaws, obstacles that made him difficult compared to Sarah's twins, Sophie and Liam, whose predictable milestones fit their vision of perfect grandchildren. When I shared Caleb's diagnosis with my parents over dinner at their Naperville home, their reactions were a gut punch. James, ever the pragmatic accountant, cleared his throat and stared at his plate, muttering, "Kids get labeled too quickly these days." A bit of discipline would sort him out. Patricia's face, usually warm, tightened with a flicker of disappointment before she asked, "Will this resolve itself? Will he be normal someday?" Their words stung, not just for their ignorance, but for the implication that Caleb, my perfect boy, was somehow less. I tried to explain his sensory challenges, his incredible memory, the strategies we were using, but their eyes glazed over, their interest waning. Later, Sarah sent a text. Sorry about Caleb's diagnosis. Must be tough. The twins miss him at swim class maybe when he's more settled. The word settled landed like a slap, as if Caleb's very existence was a problem to be fixed. Determined to bridge the gap, I invited my parents to a stargazing night I'd planned for Caleb last summer. I spent weeks preparing, setting up telescopes in our backyard and printing star charts, picturing Caleb's face glowing as he shared his passion. I thought if they saw his light, his knowledge, his joy, they'd understand. But they declined, citing a soccer game for Sophie and Liam. It's a busy weekend, Patricia said, her voice casual, as if Caleb's moment was just another item on a checklist. The rejection hurt, but I pressed on, hoping for another chance. For his 6th birthday, Caleb crafted a model solar system, each planet painted with care. He wrapped it proudly to gift to his grandparents, his eyes shining with hope. When we visited, they thanked him politely but left the model in their garage untouched. I found it weeks later, gathering dust, a symbol of their indifference. Undeterred, I started a small blog, Starry Days, to share our journey with Caleb and connect with other parents of neurodivergent kids. What began as a few posts about sensory strategies grew into a community, with families from across the country sharing stories and support. One reader, a mom from Seattle, wrote, "Your words make me feel less alone." That connection fueled me, a reminder that Caleb's light resonated far beyond our family's narrow lens. At home, Mark and I leaned into Caleb's passions, taking him to the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, where he chatted with astronomers like an old friend. His therapist noted his progress, fewer meltdowns, better coping skills, proof that with love and support, he was thriving. But the contrast with my parents grew starker. They'd volunteer to babysit Sophie and Liam weekly, filling their Lake Tahoe vacation home with laughter and photos of fishing trips. Caleb, meanwhile, was rarely invited, their excuses always tied to his fussy nature. At a family barbecue, I overheard Patricia tell a cousin, "Caleb's just so intense it's hard to keep up." The words pierced me, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little they tried to know him. Caleb, who'd spent that day quietly teaching Liam about the Milky Way, deserved better. This chapter isn't just about Caleb's diagnosis or my parents' dismissal. It's about the profound love that sees a child's differences as strengths, not deficits. It's about the ache of watching those you love reject the person you cherish most, and the resolve to keep shining anyway. Caleb's lightless curiosity, his kindness, his unbreakable spirit became my compass, guiding me through the pain of my parents' indifference. Have you ever fought to help someone you love be seen for who they truly are? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. This journey is far from over, friends. What happened next would push us to confront truths we never expected, but it all began with Caleb, whose light refuses to be dimmed. Hello, friends. Laura Bennett here, speaking from the heart of Naperville, Illinois, where the quiet beauty of our suburban streets hides the slow, painful fractures that can grow within a family. If you're tuning in from somewhere across America, drop your city in the comments, I'd love to know where you are. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this chapter of our story is about the ache of watching a divide widen, the struggle to hold on to hope, and the fierce determination to protect a child's worth. In my previous chapters, I shared how a Christmas invitation excluding my son Caleb shattered my world, how my childhood in my sister Sarah's shadow shaped me, and how Caleb's unique light became my guiding star. Today, I'm diving into the years when the favoritism toward Sarah's twins, Sophie and Liam, over Caleb became impossible to ignore. Each slight a crack in the foundation of our family, pushing me closer to a reckoning I never wanted but could no longer avoid. The divide didn't appear overnight. It grew slowly, like frost creeping across a window, subtle at first but chilling in its clarity. After Caleb's diagnosis with sensory processing disorder and traits of high-functioning autism at 5, I held on to the hope that my parents, James and Patricia Coleman, would come to see him as Mark and I did a brilliant boy whose differences were part of his magic. But instead, their actions began to draw a line between Caleb and his cousins, Sophie and Liam, Sarah's twins, who seemed to embody the effortless perfection my parents prized. Each family gathering, each holiday, each casual visit, became a stage where this disparity played out, and the weight of it pressed heavier on my heart with every passing year. One of the earliest signs came when my parents bought a vacation home in Lake Tahoe, a sprawling retreat nestled among pines, meant to be a haven for family memories. I imagined Caleb there, gazing at the stars over the lake, his voice bubbling with facts about the cosmos. But the invitations told a different story. Sarah, Ryan, Sophie, and Liam were welcomed nearly every weekend, their laughter filling my parents' social media posts, fishing trips, bonfires, s'mores under the moonlight. Our family, though, was invited sparingly, relegated to occasional Sunday afternoons, our visits brief and tightly scheduled. "It's easier with the twins," Patricia once said, her voice light but cutting. "Caleb needs so much structure." The implication that Caleb was a burden stung, but I swallowed it, telling myself they'd come around. The favoritism grew bolder at family events. At my parents' 35th anniversary celebration, held at an elegant Naperville venue, Sophie and Liam, then 4, were the stars of the evening. They wore custom Grandkids of Honor shirts, their names embroidered in gold, and were invited to stand beside James and Patricia during the toasts, their giggles echoing through the room. Caleb, 5, and struggling with the noise of the crowd, was handed a coloring book and told to sit at a corner table. I watched him, his small hands gripping the crayons, his eyes flickering toward his cousin's spotlight, and felt a pang of guilt. I'd hoped he'd feel included, but instead, he was sidelined, his presence an afterthought. When I questioned my mother later, she brushed it off. "The twins practiced their parts for weeks, Laura. Caleb would have been overwhelmed." Her words, meant to soothe, only deepened the wound. Caleb's 6th birthday was another turning point. We planned a small sensory-friendly party at our Naperville home, with quiet games and a space-themed cake tailored to his needs. I sent invitations early, hoping my parents would see how much Caleb had grown. How he could now share his toys, how his meltdowns were fewer thanks to therapy. But James and Patricia arrived 45 minutes late, bearing a gift that showed how little they understood him. A noisy, flashing robot toy, the kind that would send him into a panic. They stayed barely an hour, their eyes on their watches, before leaving for Liam's soccer game. "It's a big match," James said, as if Caleb's milestone was less significant. Later, I saw Patricia's social media post beaming photos of them in proud grandparent jerseys at the game, no mention of Caleb's day. The contrast was a knife to my heart. Desperate to bridge the gap, I organized a stargazing night in our backyard, a chance for Caleb to shine. I spent weeks setting up telescopes, printing star charts, and crafting a guide for the family to follow. I pictured Caleb pointing out constellations, his voice bright with pride, and my parents finally seeing his brilliance. But they declined, citing a dance recital for Sophie and Liam. "It's a busy weekend," Patricia said, her tone dismissive. The rejection wasn't just for me, it was for Caleb, who'd spent days practicing his star talk. That night, as he asked why Grandma and Grandpa didn't come, his voice small and confused, I fought back tears, promising him we'd stargaze together. Mark held my hand, his silence heavy with shared pain. The divide deepened in small, cruel moments. At a family barbecue, Caleb overheard Patricia tell a cousin, "Caleb's so hard to handle compared to the twins." He was 6, sitting quietly with a book about planets, teaching Liam about the Milky Way. The words weren't meant for him, but they landed like a blow. He came to me later, his eyes searching. "Am I too hard, Mommy?" I pulled him close, my voice steady despite the ache. "You're perfect, Caleb. Some people just don't see it yet." But inside, my resolve hardened. My parents' refusal to understand Caleb wasn't just ignorance. It was a choice, one that hurt my son. Their Lake Tahoe home became a symbol of the divide. Photos of Sophie and Liam filled their albums building snowmen, baking cookies, fishing with James. Caleb appeared in a handful of shots, always on the edges, his presence incidental. When I asked why we weren't invited more, James said, "It's tough with Caleb's needs. The twins are easier to manage." The excuse was flimsy, a veil for their preference. I began to see the pattern. Sophie and Liam were the grandchildren they showcased, while Caleb was the one they tolerated. Each slight chipped away at my hope, but I clung to the idea that love could change them. I sent articles about neurodiversity, invited them to Caleb's therapy sessions, even started a blog, Starry Days, to share our journey. The blog connected me with parents nationwide, their stories of advocacy giving me strength, but my parents remained unmoved. At a family dinner, when Caleb excitedly shared a fact about black holes, Patricia cut him off. "That's nice, honey, but let's talk about something everyone understands." The table fell silent, and Caleb's face fell, his light dimmed by her words. This chapter is about more than missed invitations or thoughtless gifts. It's about the slow, searing pain of watching your child be pushed aside, deemed less worthy because he doesn't fit a mold. It's about the fight to hold on to hope when those you love build walls instead of bridges. Caleb's laughter, his sketches of stars, his quiet acts of kindness, these were my anchors, reminding me that his worth was undeniable, even if my parents couldn't see it. Have you ever watched someone you love be overlooked, their light ignored? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. This journey is building toward a breaking point, friends. What came next would force us to face truths we could no longer ignore. But it was Caleb's heart that kept me fighting. Hello, friends. Laura Bennett here, speaking from the quiet streets of Naperville, Illinois, where the glow of holiday lights can't always mask the shadows cast by broken trust. If you're listening from somewhere across America, drop your city in the comments. I'd love to connect. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this chapter of our story is about the moment a single piece of paper shattered my hope, ignited my resolve, and set me on a path to fight for my son's place in our family. In my previous chapters, I shared how a Christmas invitation excluding my son Caleb while welcoming his cousins tore my heart apart, how growing up in my sister Sarah's shadow shaped my pain, how Caleb's unique light became my guiding star, and how a growing divide with my parents, James and Patricia Coleman, pushed us toward a breaking point. Today, I'm diving into the moment that Christmas invitation became more than a slight, became a declaration of exclusion that forced me to choose between family tradition and my son's worth. It was a chilly December afternoon, the kind where the air carries the promise of snow and the warmth of holiday anticipation. I stood at our kitchen counter in Naperville, sorting through a stack of holiday cards, their festive reds and greens, a stark contrast to the heaviness I'd been carrying. Among them was the elegant, gold-embossed envelope from my parents, a hallmark of their annual Christmas dinner, a tradition woven into the fabric of my life. I opened it with a flicker of hope, imagining Caleb's laughter mingling with the clink of glasses, his star sketches passed around the table. But as I read the words, typed in cold black and gold, my heart stopped. Annual Coleman Family Christmas, the 25th of December, 3 p.m. Adults, Sophie and Liam only, please. Sophie and Liam, my sister Sarah's twins, were invited to share in the holidays' magic, while Caleb, my 8-year-old son with his galaxy-filled eyes, was explicitly excluded. I read the line again, my hands trembling, willing the words to change. But there it was, a deliberate choice to bar my son from the family's heart, to deem him unworthy of their Christmas table. The pain was a physical force, a wave of grief and fury crashing over me. How could my parents, the ones who'd taught me about family, draw such a cruel line? How could they look at Caleb's kindness, his brilliance, and see only a problem to be left behind? The invitation wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the culmination of years of favoritism, a final blow in a pattern that had sidelined Caleb at every turn. I thought of the Lake Tahoe vacations where Sophie and Liam were constant guests while we were rarely invited, the anniversary party where they wore Grandkids of Honor shirts while Caleb colored alone, the birthday where my parents left early for Liam's soccer game. Each moment had chipped away at my hope, but I'd clung to the belief that love could bridge the gap. This, though, was different. This was a public declaration, a line in the sand that said Caleb didn't belong. I showed the card to Mark, my husband, his steady presence. A lifeline in the storm. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with a protective fury I'd rarely seen. "This isn't right, Laura," he said, his voice low but resolute. "They're crossing a line, and Caleb deserves better." I nodded, tears spilling over, my heart breaking for the boy upstairs, sketching planets in his room, unaware that his grandparents had cast him out. The thought of him learning this truth of his small heart questioning his worth was unbearable. In that moment, I knew I had to act. but the path forward was fraught with pain. Confronting my parents meant risking the fragile ties that bound us, yet staying silent meant betraying Caleb. That night, I found an old letter from my mother, tucked in a drawer of keepsakes. Written when I was pregnant with Caleb, it promised to love all her grandchildren equally, to cherish each one as a gift. The words, once a comfort, now felt like a betrayal, a promise broken before Caleb was even born. I held the letter, tears staining the paper, and felt the weight of my parents' choices. They'd had every chance to embrace Caleb, to learn about his sensory needs, to celebrate his love for stars, but they'd chosen Sophie and Liam, the easier grandchildren, instead. The letter fueled my resolve, a reminder that I wasn't imagining the injustice. It was real, and it was wrong. I called my parents the next evening, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "Why is Caleb excluded from Christmas?" I asked, clutching the invitation. Patricia's voice was practiced. Her tone, the one she used for uncomfortable truths. "We thought it would be better for everyone, Laura. Christmas has traditions, gift exchanges, formal dinner that might be hard for Caleb. We didn't want to disrupt the magic for Sophie and Liam." The words landed like a slap, each one a dismissal of Caleb's place in our family. When I pressed, suggesting accommodations, a quiet space, adjusted activities, James took the phone, his accountant's precision cutting through. "Let's be practical. Last Thanksgiving, Caleb got overwhelmed during the family photo. We want a peaceful celebration." Then came the suggestion that seared my soul. "Maybe you and Mark could take turns on stays with Caleb. The other joins us." The idea that my son was a burden to be managed, that we should split our family to preserve their peaceful Christmas, unleashed a fury I hadn't known I possessed. "So, you're saying Caleb isn't welcome, but his cousins are?" I asked, my voice shaking. James sighed, impatient. "We're acknowledging his needs make things complicated." The call ended with excuses, but their message was clear. Caleb was an inconvenience, not a grandchild to be cherished. I hung up, tears streaming, Mark's arms around me as I sobbed, the weight of their rejection crushing. Sarah's text arrived an hour later, dripping with condescension. "Heard about the Christmas drama. Seriously, Laura? Can't you think about the whole family instead of just Caleb?" Her words, from a mother who should have understood, fractured something deep within me. She wasn't just complicit. She was an architect of this exclusion, prioritizing her twin's comfort over her nephew's heart. I stared at the message. The sister I'd once idolized, now a stranger. Her loyalty to our parents' favoritism, a betrayal I couldn't unsee. Mark's voice broke through my despair. "We don't have to accept this, Laura. We can make our own Christmas, one that celebrates Caleb." His words sparked a flicker of possibility, but I wasn't ready to walk away. I wanted my parents to see their mistake, to choose Caleb, to choose us. I spent sleepless nights replaying the call, drafting emails I never sent, each word a plea for them to understand. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about misunderstanding, it was about choice. They'd chosen a vision of family that excluded my son, and I could no longer pretend it was an accident. This chapter is about more than a holiday snub. It's about the moment hope collides with reality, when you realize love can be conditional, even from those who raised you. It's about the fire that ignites when a mother sees her child's worth dismissed, and the courage to stand against tradition for the sake of truth. Caleb's sketches, his quiet questions about the stars, his unwavering trust in Methies were my strength, reminding me that his place in this world was non-negotiable. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and fighting for someone you love? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. This journey is reaching a turning point, friends. What I discovered next would unravel secrets that changed everything, but it was Caleb's heart that kept me moving forward. Hello, friends. Laura Bennett here, reaching out from Naperville, Illinois, where the quiet charm of our town belies the storm of revelations that can upend a family. If you're joining me from somewhere across America, drop your city in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this chapter of our story is about the moment truth broke through years of denial, exposing a web of betrayal that shook me to my core. In my previous chapters, I shared how a Christmas invitation excluding my son Caleb while welcoming his cousins shattered my heart, how growing up in my sister Sarah's shadow shaped my pain, how Caleb's unique light became my guide, how a growing divide with my parents, James and Patricia Coleman, became undeniable, and how that final exclusion pushed me to confront them. Today, I'm diving into the unraveling of Secret's financial manipulations, deliberate exclusions, and a calculated campaign to diminish Caleb's place in our family that transformed my grief into a resolve to seek justice. The Christmas invitation, with its cold directive to exclude Caleb, was the spark that ignited my need for answers. It wasn't just a holiday snub, it was a declaration, a culmination of years of favoritism that I could no longer dismiss as misunderstanding. Mark and I sat at our kitchen table in Naperville, the offending card between us, its gold-embossed words a stark reminder of my parents' choice. "This isn't random, Laura," Mark said, his voice steady but laced with anger. "There's more to this, and we need to know what." His words echoed my growing suspicion that the pattern of sidelining Kalibover looked invitations, thoughtless gifts. Dismissive comments wasn't accidental but intentional. I needed proof, not just for my own clarity but to protect Caleb from a family that seemed determined to erase him. The first clue came unexpectedly from my cousin Rachel, a sharp-eyed auditor who worked at my uncle's financial firm in Chicago. She'd always been a quiet presence at family gatherings, observant but reserved. A week after the Christmas invitation, she called, her voice hesitant but urgent. "Laura, there's something you need to see," she said. "Can we meet?" We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in downtown Naperville, the kind of place where the hum of conversation could mask the weight of what she was about to share. Rachel arrived with a leather portfolio, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. "I've been debating whether to tell you," she admitted, her eyes searching mine. "But after that Christmas card, I couldn't stay silent." What she laid out on the table was a trail of financial betrayal that stretched back years. First, she showed me trust documents for educational funds established for Sophie and Liam, Sarah's twins. Each fund held over $80,000, with regular contributions from my parents. Beside them was a single-page document for Caleb's trust, containing just $5,000, with no deposits in 3 years. The disparity was staggering, a concrete measure of how little my parents valued Caleb's future. Rachel didn't stop there. She revealed property records showing that the Lake Tahoe vacation home, promised as a shared family asset, had been transferred solely to Sarah's name 2 years ago, effectively cutting me and Caleb out. "They did it quietly," Rachel said, pointing to the dates, right around the time of Caleb's diagnosis. The financial manipulations went deeper. My parents co-owned a small chain of bakeries with Patricia's sister, a business I'd been told would be split equally between Sarah and me. But updated ownership documents showed my stake reduced to a token 5%, while Sarah now held 45%, with my parents retaining the rest. "This was restructured 3 years ago," Rachel explained, her voice tight. "It aligns with when they started pulling back from Caleb. The timing wasn't a coincidence, it was a strategy, a deliberate move to prioritize Sarah's perfect family over mine." The most damning evidence came in the form of emails, inadvertently copied to Rachel during a routine audit of family accounts. One, from James to his estate attorney, discussed concerns about Caleb's future needs, suggesting his sensory processing disorder and autism traits made him unpredictable for managing assets. "We need to protect family resources from potential drain," James wrote, the words chilling in their clinical detachment. Another email, between Patricia and Sarah, was even more personal. Sarah wrote, "Laura's making Caleb's issues the center of everything. It's exhausting for the twins." Patricia's reply was a gut punch. "I know, sweetheart. We want Sophie and Liam to have normal family moments without Caleb's needs overshadowing them." The implication that Caleb was a disruption, not a grandchild, felt like a betrayal of everything family should mean. But the revelations didn't end there. Rachel showed me a folder of printed social media posts, curated family albums, where Caleb's presence was systematically minimized. A Thanksgiving photo, shared on Patricia's page, showed Sophie and Liam flanking my parents, their smiles bright. Caleb, who'd been in the original group shot, was cropped out, his absence a digital erasure. "They've been doing this for years," Rachel said softly, editing him out of the family story. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just neglect. It was a campaign to rewrite our family's narrative, casting Caleb as an outsider. The most personal blow came from a message Sarah sent to Patricia, uncovered in the email chain. Laura's blowing Caleb's diagnosis out of proportion, using it to get attention. I think it's something on her side, maybe her genes. Patricia's response was devastating. You're probably right. There's nothing like this in our family. The suggestion that Caleb's neurodiversity was a flaw, a genetic defect tied to me, was a knife to my heart. It wasn't just ignorance, it was prejudice, a refusal to see Caleb as a person, not a problem. Sarah, my sister, who'd once been my confidant, had actively fueled this narrative, positioning her twins as the normal grandchildren deserving of love and resources. As Rachel laid out the final piece of draft of my parents' updated will, allocating substantial trusts for Sophie and Liam, but only a token amount for Caleb, I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't a series of oversights. It was a calculated effort to diminish Caleb's place in our family, to protect their legacy at the expense of my son. Mark, who joined us midway through, paced the coffee shop, his face flushed with anger. They're treating Caleb like he's disposable, he said, his voice breaking. Like he's less than human. Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with regret. I should have spoken up sooner, she said, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. The truth was a heavy burden, but it was also a clarion call. Each document, each email, each edited photo was a piece of a puzzle that revealed my parents' and Sarah's choices. They hadn't just excluded Caleb from Christmas, they'd been excluding him from their vision of family for years, prioritizing appearances over love. The pain was raw, a mix of grief for the family I'd thought I had and fury for the injustice done to my son. But it also brought clarity. I couldn't change their hearts, but I could hold them accountable. Caleb, with his sketches of stars and his quiet kindness, deserved a family that saw his worth, and I would fight to give him that. This chapter is about more than uncovering secrets. It's about the courage to face painful truths, to see betrayal for what it is, and to choose justice over silence. It's about a mother's love that refuses to let her child be erased, no matter the cost. Caleb's lightest passion, his resilience, kept me grounded, reminding me that truth, however painful, is the foundation of change. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed how you saw those you love? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. This journey is escalating, friends. What we did with this truth would redefine our family forever, but it was Caleb's heart that led the way. Hello, friends. Laura Bennett here, speaking from the heart of Naperville, Illinois, where the quiet beauty of our town contrasts with the storm of courage it takes to face those you love with hard truths. If you're joining me from somewhere across America, drop your city in the comments, I'd love to connect. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this chapter of our story is about the moment I stood up to my family, armed with evidence of their betrayal, to demand justice for my son, Caleb. In my previous chapters, I shared how a Christmas invitation excluding Caleb while welcoming his cousins broke my heart. How growing up in my sister Sarah's shadow shaped my pain. How Caleb's unique light became my guide. How a growing divide with my parents, James and Patricia Coleman, became undeniable. How that exclusion pushed me to act. And how uncovering a web of financial and emotional manipulation gave me the proof I needed. Today, I'm diving into the confrontation that changed everything. A raw, emotional clash that tested my resolve but solidified my commitment to Caleb's worth. The truth: Rachel revealed trust funds favoring Sarah's twins, Sophie and Liam, over Caleb, the Lake Tahoe home transferred to Sarah, edited photos erasing Caleb, emails dismissing him as a burden was a fire in my veins. It wasn't just about a Christmas snub. It was a calculated campaign to diminish my son's place in our family. Mark and I knew we couldn't stay silent. We needed to confront my parents and Sarah, not just to air our pain but to demand accountability. We planned meticulously, consulting Mark's college friend Michael, a family law specialist in Chicago. He helped us compile a portfolio of evidence: the Christmas invitation, financial records, emails, and social media posts. Each document was a brick in a wall of truth we'd build to protect Caleb. We chose the 27th of December for the meeting, a strategic moment between Christmas and New Year's when my parents would be home, but Sarah's family would likely be away. The winter afternoon cast long shadows across their immaculate Naperville living room as Mark and I arrived, the portfolio heavy in my hands. Patricia greeted us with a smile that faltered at our serious expressions. What a surprise, she said, her voice tinged with unease. James, reading in his armchair, looked up, his accountant's precision masking any warmth. What's this about? He asked, setting his book aside. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and placed the portfolio on their antique coffee table. We need to talk, I said, meeting James's gaze. This is about Caleb, and it's long overdue. I began with the Christmas invitation, holding it up, its words a stark accusation. You excluded Caleb from Christmas while inviting Sophie and Liam, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. This isn't just one mistake, it's part of a pattern. I opened the portfolio, laying out the evidence methodically. First, the trust documents. $80,000 for each twin, $5,000 for Caleb. You've invested in their futures, but not his, I said, watching Patricia's eyes widen. Next, the Lake Tahoe property transfer to Sarah, dated just after Caleb's diagnosis. You promised this was for all of us, I said, my voice cracking. Then, the bakery ownership records, my stake slashed to 5% while Sarah held 45%. This was supposed to be equal, I added, the betrayal raw. The emails were harder to present, each word a wound. I read James's note to his attorney. Protect family resources from potential drain. Patricia's reply to Sarah. We want normal family moments without Caleb's needs overshadowing. My voice shook as I said, You called my son a burden. Someone to edit out of photos and exclude from your legacy. Patricia's face crumpled, tears welling. But James's expression hardened, his attorney instincts kicking in. These lack context, he said, his tone clipped. Financial decisions involve complex considerations you're not privy to. I countered. The context is in your words, Dad. You reduced Caleb's inheritance because of his neurodiversity. The atmosphere shifted when Rachel arrived, as planned, carrying additional financial records. Her presence stunned. My parents' James's jaw tightened. Patricia's tears stopped. You had no right to access this, James said, his voice a low growl. Rachel stood firm. As an auditor with legal access through Uncle Robert's firm, I had a moral obligation to expose this. Her documents, detailing discrepancies in my grandfather's estate distribution, showed Caleb's share redirected to an account controlled by my parents and Sarah. The room grew heavy, the weight of their choices inescapable. Sarah's unexpected arrival, summoned by a frantic text from Patricia, escalated the tension. She stormed in, her designer boots clicking on the marble foyer, her face a mask of practiced concern. What's going on? Mom sounded upset, she said, scanning the room. Her eyes landed on the portfolio, recognition flickering before she recovered. Is this some intervention? Family finances aren't for outsiders, she said, glancing at Rachel and Mark. I met her gaze unflinching. This is about accountability, Sarah. For excluding Caleb, for manipulating our parents against him, for years of deliberate discrimination. I revealed her emails, highlighting her suggestion to add adults, Sophie, and Liam only, to the Christmas invitation. This was your idea, I said, watching her composure crack. You fed them lies about Caleb, blamed his neurodiversity on my genes. I presented medical records from Caleb's specialist, stating sensory processing disorder has no proven hereditary link. You used his condition to justify treating him as less, I said, my voice rising. Sarah's defense faltered, her voice sharp. You're under stress, Laura. You're seeing conspiracies where there are just practical decisions. But the evidence was undeniable. Her role in Caleb's exclusion laid bare. The climax came when I played a video of Caleb at his school science fair, presenting a project on black holes. His voice, clear and confident, captivated the room as he explained complex theories, his passion infectious. This is the child you've deemed unworthy, I said, tears streaming. This is the grandson you've written out of your will, the nephew you've erased. The silence was deafening, the weight of their actions pressing down. Patricia sobbed, We love Caleb, Laura. It's just hard. James, his voice strained, admitted, Financial planning requires tough choices. Caleb's needs are unpredictable. Their words meant as justification, revealed a prejudice that valued normalcy over love. I laid out our demands: equal financial provisions for all grandchildren, a public apology to Caleb, and a commitment to learn about neurodiversity. Either you acknowledge the harm you've caused and change, or you lose us, I said, my voice unwavering. James tried to negotiate, suggesting a compromise on the property. But Mark cut through. This isn't a deal. These are conditions for a relationship with your daughter and grandson. As we gathered our documents, Patricia clutched my arm, tears streaming. Don't take Caleb away, she pleaded. My response was raw. You pushed him away every time you chose Sophie and Liam over him. We're just honoring the choice you've made. Walking out that door was a release, a step away from toxic patterns disguised as tradition. This confrontation wasn't just about airing grievances, it was about reclaiming Caleb's worth, about breaking a cycle of conditional love. His sketches of stars, his quiet courage, fueled me, reminding me that truth is the foundation of justice. Have you ever had to confront someone you love to protect someone else? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. This journey is far from over, friends. What we built from this moment would redefine family, but it was Caleb's light that led the way. Hello, friends. Laura Bennett here, speaking from the warm embrace of Naperville, Illinois, where the quiet streets and starlit skies have become a canvas for rebuilding what family truly means. If you're joining me from somewhere across America, drop your city in the comments, I'd love to connect. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this chapter of our story is about finding light after loss, creating a family rooted in love, and watching my son, Caleb, blossom in a world that celebrates his unique shine. In my previous chapters, I shared how a Christmas invitation excluding Caleb while welcoming his cousins broke my heart, how growing up in my sister Sarah's shadow shaped my pain, how Caleb's radiant light became my guide, how a growing divide with my parents, James and Patricia Coleman, became undeniable, how their exclusion pushed me to act, how uncovering their betrayal gave me strength, and how confronting them demanded justice. Today, I'm sharing the moment we turned away from toxic ties and built a new family, one that wraps Caleb in unconditional love and shows us all what belonging feels like. The confrontation with my parents and Sarah left me raw, a mix of grief for the family I'd lost, and resolve to protect Caleb from their conditional love. Walking out of their Naperville home on that December afternoon, the winter air sharp against my skin, I felt both shattered and free. Mark's hand in mine was a steady anchor, his quiet strength a reminder that we weren't alone. We'll make our own family, he said, his voice firm but warm. One that sees Caleb for who he is. Those words became our blueprint, a promise to create a space where Caleb's lightest passion for stars, his gentle heart could thrive without the shadow of rejection. Our first step was reimagining Christmas, the holiday that had sparked this journey. Instead of my parents' formal dinner, we traveled to Madison, Wisconsin, to celebrate with Mark's parents, Ellen and Tom. Their modest home, filled with the scent of pine and homemade cookies, was a sanctuary of warmth. Ellen, a retired librarian with a knack for storytelling, and Tom, a former mechanic whose laughter filled the room, had always embraced Caleb's differences. They'd educated themselves about his sensory needs, creating a cozy nook in their basement with weighted blankets and dim lights where he could retreat if overwhelmed. That Christmas, they went further, tailoring the day to Caleb's joy. They set up a telescope in their backyard for stargazing, crafted sensory-friendly ornaments, and planned a quiet gift exchange where Caleb's turn was celebrated with cheers. Watching him beam as he unwrapped a book on constellations, his cousins from Mark's side listening raptly to his explanations, I felt tears of gratitude. This was family love that adapts, that includes, that sees. Ellen and Tom's home became our haven, but we didn't stop there. Back in Naperville, I sought out a community that understood Caleb's world. Through my blog, Starry Days, I'd connected with parents of neurodivergent children, their stories of advocacy mirroring my own. Inspired, I joined a local support group, meeting weekly at a Naperville community center. The first session, I was nervous, unsure if I'd fit in. But as parents shared their triumphs and struggles celebrating a child's first calm birthday party, navigating school accommodations, I felt a kinship I'd never known with my own family. One mom, Jenny, whose daughter had similar sensory challenges, became a fast friend. "You're not alone," she said, squeezing my hand. That group became our extended family, a circle where Caleb was celebrated, not tolerated. Inspired by these connections, I launched a podcast, Starry Nights, to share our journey and amplify neurodivergent voices. What began as a small project grew, with listeners from Seattle to Miami sending messages of support. One episode, where Caleb joined me to talk about his favorite constellation, Orion, went viral, his earnest voice touching hearts. "My son's not broken," I said in the outro. "He's a star, and so are your kids." The podcast gave me purpose, a way to turn our pain into a beacon for others. It also gave Caleb confidence, his shy smile growing bolder as he realized his story mattered. Caleb's growth was the heart of our new beginning. Free from the subtle rejections of my parents' world, no more overheard comments about being hard to handle, no more sidelined moments at family events. She blossomed. His therapist noted remarkable progress. Fewer meltdowns, better emotional regulation, a newfound ease in social settings. At school, he joined a kids' astronomy club, a space where his passion for stars found peers who shared it. I watched him at a club meeting, explaining supernovas to a wide-eyed group, his hands animated, his voice steady. "That's my boy," I whispered to Mark, my heart swelling. The absence of my parents' judgment was like sunlight after a long winter, letting Caleb's roots grow deep. We also created new traditions to anchor our family. Every Friday, we hosted Star Night at home, inviting Jenny's family and others from the support group. Kids played sensory-friendly games, parents swapped stories, and Caleb led stargazing sessions, his telescope a bridge to connection. One evening, as he pointed out the Pleiades, a friend's son asked, "How do you know so much?" Caleb grinned. "I just love stars." That moment, surrounded by laughter and acceptance, was a gift my parents could never give. Our home became a haven, its walls echoing with the joy of a family we'd chosen, not inherited. Mark's parents played a pivotal role, their love a stark contrast to James and Patricia's coldness. They attended Caleb's school events, cheering at his science fair where he presented a model of the solar system. Ellen kept a scrapbook of his sketches, displaying them proudly on their fridge, a gesture that healed wounds left by my mother's indifference. Tom, with his knack for fixing things, built Caleb a custom telescope stand, sturdy and perfect for his height. "For my favorite astronomer," he said, ruffling Caleb's hair. Their actions showed Caleb he was enough, a lesson I wished my parents had taught. This new family wasn't without challenges. I grieved the loss of my parents and Sarah, the dream of a reconciled family fading with each silent week. But the pain was tempered by the joy of watching Caleb thrive. One night, as we stargazed, he asked, "Why don't Grandma and Grandpa come anymore?" I paused, choosing honesty. "Sometimes. People don't understand how special you are, but we're building a family who does." He nodded, his eyes on the sky, and said, "I like our new family." His words were a balm, proof that love could heal what rejection had broken. Building this family was about more than replacing what we'd lost. It was about redefining family as a choice, a commitment to love without conditions. It was about creating a world where Caleb's neurodiversity wasn't a flaw but a strength, where his light could shine without being dimmed. Our community, Ellen and Tom, the support group, our Star Night, friends taught me that family isn't bound by blood, but by who shows up, who makes space for differences, who celebrates uniqueness. Caleb's laughter, his sketches of galaxies, his quiet trust in us, these were the threads weaving our new tapestry. Have you ever had to build a new family, choosing love over obligation? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. This journey is evolving, friends. What we discovered in the aftermath of this choice would deepen our healing, but it was Caleb's heart, radiant and unbroken, that showed us the way. Hello, friends. Laura Bennett here, speaking from the heart of Naperville, Illinois, where the soft glow of spring and the quiet hum of our community have become a backdrop for healing wounds and nurturing new beginnings. If you're joining me from somewhere across America, drop your city in the comments, I'd love to connect. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this chapter of our story is about the tender, transformative journey of mending a broken heart, watching my son Caleb flourish, and finding strength in the messy beauty of growth. In my previous chapters, I shared how a Christmas invitation excluding Caleb while welcoming his cousins shattered my world, how growing up in my sister Sarah's shadow shaped my pain, how Caleb's radiant light became my guide, how a growing divide with my parents, James and Patricia Coleman, became undeniable, how their exclusion pushed me to act, how uncovering their betrayal fueled my resolve, how confronting them demanded justice, and how building a new family rooted in love gave us a fresh start. Today, I'm diving into the healing that followed the quiet victories, the lingering grief, and the profound growth that showed us a path forward, lit by Caleb's unbreakable spirit. The confrontation with my parents and Sarah left me raw, like a wound exposed to air, painful but necessary for healing. Walking away from their Naperville home that December day, I carried a mix of liberation and loss. I'd stood up for Caleb, demanding they see his worth, but their refusal to meet our term sequel financial provisions, an apology, education about neurodiversity meant severing ties I'd once thought unbreakable. The silence that followed was deafening. No calls, no texts, just an empty space where family had been. Mark held me through the nights I sobbed, his steady presence a reminder that we'd made the right choice. "You protected Caleb," he said, his voice gentle. "That's what matters." But the grief was real mourning not just for my parents and sister, but for the family I'd hoped they could be. Letting go of that is freedom. Through our sessions, I learned to set boundaries without guilt, to honor my pain without letting it define me. One exercise, writing a letter to my younger self. The girl who felt second to Sarah, brought tears and clarity. "You are enough," I wrote, words I wished I'd heard as a child, words I now vowed to live by. Caleb's growth was the heartbeat of our healing. Free from the subtle rejections of my parents' world, no more sidelined moments at family events, no more overheard comments about being hard to handle, he thrived in ways that took my breath away. His therapist reported remarkable progress: fewer sensory meltdowns, stronger emotional regulation, and a growing confidence in social settings. At school, his astronomy club became a haven, where he led discussions on black holes with a poise that belied his 8 years. I watched him at a club meeting, his hands gesturing as he explained supernovas, his peers hanging on every word. "That's my star," I whispered to Mark, my heart swelling. One evening, as we stargazed in our Naperville backyard, Caleb said, "I don't need Grandma if you love me enough, Mommy." His words, simple and profound, were a gift, proof that love could fill the gaps left by absence. Our new family, Mark's parents, Ellen and Tom, our support group in Naperville, the Star Night Friends, nurtured this growth. Ellen and Tom, in Madison, Wisconsin, became Caleb's biggest cheerleaders, attending his science fair, where he won first place for a solar system model. Ellen's scrapbook of his sketches, displayed proudly on their fridge, healed wounds my mother's indifference had left. Our support group, meeting weekly at the community center, grew into a lifeline. Jenny, whose daughter shared Caleb's sensory challenges, hosted playdates where Caleb felt safe to be himself. These connections, forged in shared understanding, showed me that family is built on love, not obligation. Inspired by our community, I poured my energy into advocacy. My podcast, Starry Nights, became a platform for neurodivergent voices, with episodes featuring parents, educators, and kids like Caleb. One episode, where Caleb shared his love for Orion, touched thousands, his voice a beacon of hope. I also organized a community workshop, Embracing Neurodiversity, at the Naperville Library, drawing families eager to learn. Teaching sensory strategies and sharing our story, I felt a purpose that turned pain into power. A father approached me after tears in his eyes. "You've given me hope for my son." That moment was a milestone, proof that our journey could light the way for others. Small signs from my parents suggested their perspective might be shifting, though not enough to mend our rift. Rachel, my cousin, emailed in February, sharing that James and Patricia had quietly restructured Caleb's trust fund, matching Sophie and Liam's at $80,000. She also noted James had enrolled in an online course about neurodiversity, though he hadn't shared this with anyone. These actions, while significant, lacked the apology and commitment we'd demanded. They were steps, not bridges, and I held firm to our boundaries. Dr. Winters helped me see this as progress without obligation. "You can acknowledge their change without reopening the door," she said. I sent a neutral card wishing them well. a gesture of peace without compromise. Healing wasn't linear. Some days, I felt empowered, buoyed by Caleb's growth and our community's love. Others, I mourned the family I'd lost, the mother who'd never know Caleb's triumphs, the sister who'd once been my confidant. A parent-teacher conference, where Caleb's teacher praised his leadership, sparked a pang. I reached for my phone to call Patricia before remembering our estrangement. But the pain softened with time, replaced by gratitude for the family we'd built. Mark and I grew closer, our shared commitment to Caleb, a bond that deepened with every star night, every quiet moment under the stars. Caleb's self-concept transformed, his understanding that his neurodiversity was a strength, not a flaw, a victory I cherished. At a workshop, he joined me to share his sensory strategies, his voice clear. "Sometimes I need quiet, but I'm still me." The audience applauded, and I saw a confidence in him that no rejection could dim. His words echoed in my own healing, a reminder that worth isn't defined by others' approval but by the love we give ourselves. This chapter is about more than moving on. It's about the courage to heal while honoring pain, to grow while carrying scars, to build a life where love is the loudest voice. It's about a boy whose light outshines rejection, and a mother who learned that boundaries are an act of love. Caleb's laughter, his sketches of galaxies, his trust in our new family, these were my anchors, guiding me through grief to gratitude. Have you ever found healing in letting go, in building something new from loss? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. This journey is nearing its close, friends, but the lessons we've learned will light our way forward, with Caleb's heart at the center. Healing began with understanding that grief. I sought out Dr. Emily Winters, a therapist in Naperville specializing in family estrangement. In her cozy office, surrounded by books and soft light, I unraveled the patterns I'd normalized for decades. Dr. Winters helped me see that my parents' favoritism wasn't my fault, that their conditional love stemmed from their own biases, not my worth. "You were taught to seek their approval at all costs," she said, her voice kind. Hello, friends. Laura Bennett here, speaking from the heart of Naperville, Illinois, where the gentle hum of our community and the starlit skies above remind me daily of the resilience and love that have carried us through. If you're joining me from somewhere across America, drop your city in the comments. I'd love to connect with you. And please, hit that subscribe button, because this final chapter of our story is about weaving together the lessons learned from pain, courage, and hope, and inviting you to reflect on what family, love, and standing up for those you cherish truly mean. In my previous chapters, I shared how a Christmas invitation excluding my son Caleb while welcoming his cousins broke my heart, how growing up in my sister Sarah's shadow shaped my pain, how Caleb's radiant light became my guide, how a growing divide with my parents, James and Patricia Coleman, became undeniable, how their exclusion pushed me to act, how uncovering their betrayal fueled my resolve, how confronting them demanded justice, how building a new family gave us a fresh start, and how healing and growth showed us a path forward. Today, I'm sharing the lessons that have emerged from this journey, truths about love, family, and the power of choosing authenticity over obligation, all anchored by Caleb's unwavering spirit. This journey began with a single piece of paper, a Christmas invitation that excluded Caleb, my 8-year-old son, while inviting his cousins, Sophie and Liam. That moment was a spark, igniting a fire within me to protect my son's worth and unravel the patterns of favoritism that had shaped our family for decades. But it was also a mirror, reflecting the deeper truths about what family means and the courage it takes to redefine it. The first lesson I learned is that family isn't defined by blood or tradition. It's defined by who shows up, who loves without conditions, and who celebrates every unique light, no matter how it shines. My parents and Sarah chose a vision of family that prized normalcy over Caleb's neurodiversity, sidelining him with thoughtless gifts, sparse invitations, and financial disparities. But in their absence, we found family in Mark's parents, Ellen and Tom, who built Caleb a telescope stand and cheered at his science fairs. In our Naperville support group, who shared our struggles and joys, and in the Star Night friends, who gathered under our backyard stars. These connections, forged in acceptance, taught me that family is a choice, a commitment to love that transcends biology. Another lesson was the power of standing up for those you love, even when it means breaking generational patterns. Confronting my parents and Sarah was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Presenting evidence of their betrayal trust funds favoring Sophie and Liam, the Lake Tahoe home transferred to Sarah, emails dismissing Caleb as a burden was like tearing down a house I'd lived in my whole life. Their refusal to meet our demand equal provisions, an apology, education about neurodiversity, forced me to walk away, a choice that hurt but set us free. That act of courage wasn't just about justice. It was about showing Caleb that his worth is non-negotiable, that love fights for inclusion, not exclusion. It was a lesson for him, too, that standing up, even when it's scary, is how we honor those we cherish. Healing, I learned, is not about erasing pain, but about growing through it. Therapy with Dr. Emily Winters helped me untangle the guilt and grief of estrangement, teaching me that boundaries are an act of love, not betrayal. Writing a letter to my younger self, the girl who felt second to Sarah, was a turning point, affirming that I was always enough. Caleb's growth mirrored this healing. Free from my parents' judgment, he thrived leading his astronomy club, sharing sensory strategies at our workshops, his confidence a beacon. His words one night, "I don't need grandma if you love me enough," were a gift, proof that love can fill any void. Healing taught me that pain and joy can coexist, that scars are part of a story that makes us stronger. Advocacy became a cornerstone of our journey, a lesson in turning pain into purpose. My podcast, Starry Nights, and our Embracing Neurodiversity workshops in Naperville grew from a need to share Caleb's story and amplify neurodivergent voices. When Caleb joined me to talk about Orion, his voice reached thousands, sparking messages from parents who found hope in our journey. Organizing these workshops, teaching sensory strategies, and seeing families connect showed me that our story could change lives. I'm now planning a book, a memoir of this journey, to reach even more hearts. Advocacy taught me that our struggles, when shared, become a light for others, a way to build a world where every child is seen. Perhaps the most profound lesson was about the resilience of love. Caleb's light-hissed sketches of galaxies, his quiet kindness, his unwavering trust carried us through rejection, betrayal, and grief. Even as my parents' silence stretched into months, small signs suggested change. Rachel reported they'd equalized Caleb's trust fund, and James enrolled in a neurodiversity course. These steps, though incomplete without an apology, hinted at a shift, a crack in their armor. But our healing didn't depend on their change. We'd built a family that loved Caleb fiercely, from Ellen's scrapbooks to Jenny's playdates. This resilience showed me that love doesn't need permission. It thrives in the spaces we create, in the choices we make to honor those we hold dear. Sarah's unexpected gesture came at a community science fair, where Caleb and Sophie both presented projects. Her brief note slipped into my bag, read, "I've been unfair to Caleb and you. I'm sorry." It wasn't the full reckoning we'd asked for, but it was a start, a hairline fracture in the wall between us. I didn't respond, holding our boundaries, but the note planted a seed of possibility for future healing, a reminder that change, however slow, is possible. Caleb's collaboration with Sophie that day, explaining a star's life cycle with patience, showed me that love can bridge divides, even when adults falter. These lessons are for all of us. Family is who loves you without strings, who makes room for your light, whether it shines like Caleb's stars or in another hue. Standing up for those you love is a legacy, a way to break cycles of hurt. Healing is a journey, not a destination, and advocacy turns pain into power. Most of all, love is resilient, a force that grows stronger through challenge. Caleb, now thriving, carries these lessons in his confident smile, his sketches, his quiet strength. His neurodiversity, once a reason for exclusion, is now a source of pride, a testament to the beauty of difference. I invite you to reflect. Have you ever had to redefine family, to stand up for someone you love, to heal through pain? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you've navigated these paths. And if this journey resonates, consider subscribing to Starry Nights, where we'll continue exploring neurodiversity, family, and the courage to choose love. This story isn't tied with a perfect bow. It's the messy middle of growth, a journey that continues with every star Caleb points out, every workshop we host, every connection we make. Thank you for walking this path with us, friends. Your presence reminds me that community, like family, is built on shared hearts. not just shared names. Here's to a brighter future, lit by love that never fades. In the quiet streets of Naperville, Illinois, Laura Bennett's story unfolded like a constellation, each moment a star in a narrative of heartbreak, courage, and redemption. It began with a single, gold-embossed Christmas invitation from her parents, James and Patricia Coleman, that excluded her 8-year-old son, Caleb, while welcoming his cousins, Sophie and Liam, Sarah's twins. That piece of paper was more than a holiday snub. It was a spark that ignited a fire within Laura, a mother determined to protect her son's worth. Caleb, with his dark curls and galaxy-filled eyes, was a boy of extraordinary light, his passion for stars and remarkable memory shining despite his sensory processing disorder and traits of high-functioning autism. But to James and Patricia, he was difficult, a grandchild who didn't fit their mold of perfection, unlike the effortlessly charming Sophie and Liam. The invitation was the culmination of years of favoritism, a pattern rooted in Laura's own childhood, where she lived in the shadow of her younger sister, Sarah, whose dance recitals and homecoming queen crown were celebrated, while Laura's science fair wins and University of Michigan scholarship were met with polite nods. The pain of that exclusion ran deep, echoing the quiet wounds of Laura's Youth Her Volcano model tucked away, her camping trip canceled for Sarah's piano recital, her modest wedding with Mark overshadowed by Sarah's lavish engagement. Yet, it was Caleb's light that became Laura's guide. His diagnosis at 5 wasn't a burden, but a map, guiding Laura and Mark to create a sensory-friendly world where Caleb could thrive. They built a quiet corner at home, joined workshops, and celebrated his ability to name Jupiter's moons. But James and Patricia saw only flaws, dismissing his needs as a lack of discipline, leaving his handcrafted solar system model in their garage, and declining his stargazing night for the twins' soccer games. The divide grew: Stark Lake Tahoe vacations for Sarah's family, sparse Sunday visits for Laura's, Grandkids of Honor shirts for Sophie and Liam, a coloring book for Caleb at their 35th anniversary. Each slight chipped away at Laura's hope, but she clung to the belief that love could change them, until that Christmas invitation made silence impossible. Fueled by a mother's fierce love, Laura sought answers, and her cousin Rachel, an auditor, revealed a web of betrayal. Trust funds for Sophie and Liam held $80,000 each, while Caleb's had $5,000. The Lake Tahoe home was transferred to Sarah. Laura's stake in the family bakery was slashed to 5%. Emails between James, Patricia, and Sarah exposed their prejudice, calling Caleb a burden, editing him out of family photos, blaming his neurodiversity on Laura's genes. The truth was a gut punch, but it armed Laura with clarity. On the 27th of December, she and Mark confronted her family in their Naperville living room, laying out the evidence: the invitation, financial records, emails, and a video of Caleb's confident science fair presentation on black holes. James justified their choices with practicality. Patricia pleaded love through tears, and Sarah's manipulation crumbled under scrutiny. Laura's demands: equal provisions, an apology, neurodiversity education, were met with resistance, forcing her to walk away, a painful but liberating choice. From that rupture, Laura built a new family, one that cherished Caleb's light. Christmas in Madison, Wisconsin, with Mark's parents, Ellen and Tom, was a haven of sensory-friendly joy stargazing, quiet gift exchanges, and love that adapted to Caleb's needs. In Naperville, Laura joined a support group, finding kinship with parents like Jenny, whose daughter shared Caleb's challenges. Her podcast, Starry Nights, and workshops on neurodiversity turned pain into purpose, with Caleb's episode on Orion touching thousands. Caleb thrived, his confidence soaring in his astronomy club, his meltdowns fading without the weight of rejection. Ellen's scrapbook of his sketches, Tom's custom telescope stand, and star night gatherings with friends wove a tapestry of belonging, proving family is who loves you unconditionally. Healing was a winding path. Therapy with Dr. Emily Winters helped Laura release guilt, affirming her worth beyond her parents' approval. Caleb's words, "I don't need grandma if you love me enough," were a balm, his growth a testament to love's resilience. Small signs from James and Patricia, like equalizing Caleb's trust fund and James's neurodiversity course, hinted at change, but without an apology, Laura held firm to her boundaries. A note from Sarah at a science fair, admitting her unfairness, planted a seed of hope, but healing didn't hinge on their redemption. Laura's book project, a memoir of this journey, promised to extend their light further, a beacon for others navigating similar paths. The lessons from Laura's story are profound and universal. First, family is not blood, but choice those who embrace your authentic self, who make space for your differences, are your true kin. Laura's new family, Ellen, Tom, Jenny, and the Naperville community showed that love adapts, celebrates, and includes. Second, standing up for those you love, even against family, is a legacy of courage. Laura's confrontation broke a cycle of conditional love. Teaching Caleb his worth is non-negotiable. Third, healing is a journey of growth, not erasure. Laura's therapy and Caleb's thriving proved that pain can coexist with joy, shaping a stronger self. Finally, advocacy transforms pain into purpose. Laura's podcast and workshops turned her story into a lifeline, showing that sharing truth builds a better world. For today's audience, these lessons are a call to action. In a world that often demands conformity, embrace those who shine differently. Your child, your friend, yourself. Create spaces where neurodiversity or any uniqueness is a strength, not a flaw. If family fails to see your worth, seek those who do. Whether in support groups, communities, or chosen kin, stand up for those you love, even if it means hard conversations or walking away. Your courage will ripple, teaching others their value. Heal by honoring your pain-seek therapy, write your story, find rituals like Laura's Star Nights to ground you, and turn your struggles into advocacy, whether through a blog, a conversation, or a kind act. Knowing your voice can light someone's path. Laura and Caleb's journey, from a painful exclusion to a radiant new beginning, reminds us that love, when rooted in truth and courage, creates a future brighter than any star. Share your story. Friend show, will you build a family of love, stand for those you cherish, and heal through your own light?